From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertley. It's Saturday, May 31st, which means you're listening to a special weekend edition of the podcast featuring the Capitol Recap. Coming up, lawmakers in Montpelier go down to the wire, trying to resolve differences on education reform and other issues. We'll update you on where things stood as negotiations stretched into the late hours last night after this. The final days and hours of a legislative session are often frantic, with months or even years of debate being resolved in feverish bursts of last-ditch negotiations at the State House. This year has been no different. Friday was targeted to be the final day of the session, but as I record this, major issues remain unresolved, especially around education reform, and it's entirely unclear whether lawmakers will work into the weekend or even beyond into next week. But if nothing else, we know what the final sticking points are. In this week's edition of Capitol Recap, Vermont Public Education reporter Lola Dufour spoke with host Kari Anderson live on the air Friday night to frame the big final debates and offer a glimpse into the final hours of a legislative session.
So Lola, are we adjourning this evening? What do you think?
I'd say it's impossible to say right now. But as you said, the sticking points were housing and education. At the very least, we do now have a deal on housing. But education remains very, very much up in the air.
All right. Well, let's take those one at a time. What are the sticking points on education?
Unfortunately, at this hour, it remains really all of the very difficult stuff. There was a general sense that there was a path to getting to yes, including with the governor, at least earlier today. But a lot of what's left to settle is really the big stuff. How much money should we spend to schools under a foundation formula, which is, a construct where the state decides on the bulk of school spending, not local voters. That's still the $2 billion question right now. The House is very wedded to their formula, which they believe is, scientifically defensible. The Senate and the governor, on the other hand, are much more concerned with arriving at a top-line spending number that isn't higher than what we're spending now. So number crunchers are very, very hard at work right now trying to figure out whether they can square those two positions. And then there's also the perennial debate, the really 50-year-old debate in Montpelier around private schools who access public funds through the state's town tuitioning program. The House wants to put very strict guardrails on which independent schools can access vouchers, and the Senate is much more protective of those private schools. And that's really relevant, especially if a lot of, schools might close in the next couple of years, right? Because there's a lot of fear about an expansion of choice.
Right. So those are the sticking points. After all these months, are there broad areas of agreement on education reform?
There are. In principle, legislative leaders and the governor are in agreement that Vermont needs to go to a foundation formula. And they want to see schools and districts consolidate. Yesterday, for example, the House and the Senate did agree on class size minimums, which is a huge deal and, would have probably paved the way for some schools to close. But there are so many details to sort out. And the last set of negotiations I just witnessed, just literally minutes ago, were very contentious. And I think, frankly, call into question whether a deal is indeed possible at all.
Oh, we know you'll keep us posted. So pivoting to housing, what has been agreed to there?
Well, the House and the Senate have a deal to create a new infrastructure financing program for housing development. It's basically an expanded form of a TIF program. And what that does is it allows developers, I'm really simplifying here, it allows developers to borrow money to build things like water lines, roads, sidewalks, and then pay back those loans with a tax break on their property taxes. Now, the House wanted a lot of guardrails. They were worried about giving out tax breaks to developments that might have happened anyways, even without that help. But the Senate and the Scott administration really pushed for fewer rules because they argued that more flexibility would ultimately translate to more homes on the tax rolls and therefore ultimately more total tax revenue. In the end, the House agreed to many of the Senate's demands, and the governor has indicated that he'll sign on to the House and Senate deal.
Well, finally, Lola, I'm wondering if you can just give us a sense of what it's like to be at the State House for these final hours of the legislative session. What are you going to be doing later into the evening?
I mean, it's really chaotic. It's very fluid. I've made several predictions today and then reversed myself completely. So I'm just here to watch it all unfold.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. That has been this week's Capitol Recap with Vermont Public's Lola Dufour. Good luck tonight, Lola. Thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thanks, Kari.
We will have the most up-to-date news on the end of the legislative session at vermontpublic.org. And thanks for listening to The Frequency today. Today's episode was edited by Mark Davis, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you Monday.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you're going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.